I just want to speak to part two, if I may, and it's good to see that the members of the opposition have had some further unclogging of their arteries, and actually, the Minister and the Chair has actually stirred himself, and also a member of the Select Committee, and it's good to see a contribution. Now, I want to go through part two, if I may, and my colleague Darren Hughes has talked about the purpose of part two, which is to amend a variety of acts relating to utility operators' access to transport corridors in order to achieve greater certainty and consistency in the rights and obligations of utility operators and corridor managers. Now, starting with the amendments to the Telecommunications Act 2001, and I can't help, Mr Chair, but note the irony in having this bill, going through committee stages today at the same time when we have other things happening that apply to every single worker in the country. I do know, before I get on to that though, I do want to also recall that in the first reading that Claire Curran, our communications spokesperson, was talking about the situation in the telecommunications industry with the Vision Stream workers who were contracted out by Telecom, whose jobs went from being employed to being self-employed, and the consequences of that on the telecommunications industry. And also, I think she's been very, very good in constantly calling the government to account on their broadband strategy and how that's rolling out, and it seems to be stalling somewhat appallingly at the moment. But just turning to clause 21, Mr Chair. Now, the first thing there is criteria for setting reasonable conditions. Now, I'd like to ask the Minister and the Chair if he could define reasonable. And the reason I want to know that is because I know that the Minister of Labour is currently proposing to remove the access of workers to the unions unless the employer agrees, which cannot be unreasonably withheld. Now, there's a whole lot of real difficulties around what reasonable or unreasonable means, so I'd like some answers to that, because that might help us when it comes to considering what the Minister of Labour is proposing. I also note under clause 22 the irony of the notice requirement there, and the previous speaker talked about lining up the notice requirements for the various utility operators, and as other speakers have said, we support that. We think it's reasonable that people should be given notice, that utility operators should be given notice, just as indeed we think it's reasonable that workers who are going to lose their jobs be given notice. But indeed, under the government's proposals for the 90-day Act, they will not be given notice. It's not required. So going back to clause 22 to 25, I'd like to know from the Minister what he thinks notice is and what reasonable notice is. In clause 147A, and about the local authority, it didn't come up in part one, but there was a long debate in the Select Committee about the definition of local authority and wastewater and water requirements, and a great deal of concern actually. And I think that concern is still there, given that the government, and well, in fact the Minister of Local Government has a bill coming forward that would enable the privatisation of water, or the contracting out of water for 35 years, and that's been discussed up and down the country, and certainly in Auckland, where I come from. So while I think we reached an agreement in the Select Committee on that, I'd like to have an assurance from the Minister that the proposal from Rodney Hyde is not going to affect this particular provision in this bill, because we did work hard on this the Select Committee to try and actually clarify that, and in fact the Greens were very, very keen on that. We reached an agreement on it, and I know that Jeanette Fitzsimons, who was on the committee at the time, was very, very keen that we had that absolutely certainly sorted out. I also note that we have amendments to the Electricity Act, and I think we've had a very interesting debate tonight about electricity generation, and I think that there's a lot of questions around that. And then we have, under clause 30, a whole new section 24A inserted, which is about, again, we get back to this word about reasonable. And I would like, again, to know from the Minister and the Chair what he considers reasonable means. Again, there is some detail in the bill about that, but I I think that it's a very, very important question here that we're considering, given that we seem to have one rule on the one hand for utility operators. Mr Chair.
Darian Fenton.
Thank you. And if I could just, if I may, Mr Chair, get on to the, without getting into the Gas Act, I'd like to get on to the amendments to the Railways Act. Again, and it was a very interesting discussion during the Select Committee process about that, because there was quite a lot of conflict between transport operators and railway corridor operators, and utilities operators who seem to believe that Kiwi Rail and what are they called? On Track were deliberately blocking access to their land. And I thought it was a very, very important point that came through in the Select Committee, which was around the safety issues in rail, and the whole issue around workers' safety, in particular the safety of the public. And I also, I had a lot of conversation. I can't remember. You might remember the member over there, if the railway union came over and came and talked, certainly the Railways Corporation, or the Kiwi Rail came and talked about the importance of workers' safety. And I have to just put on record here, Mr Chair, my concern about workers' safety under the 90-day Fire at Will bill, because what worker is going to, in the railways, is going to raise a safety issue under the provisions that they've got, because their jobs will be on the line. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So the amendments to the Railways Act 2005 are important, and I'm pleased about those. Absolutely pleased that we have those. We're on the bill, and I'm talking about Part 2, Clause 38, if the member would like to get his bill out and read it. And it's talking about amendments to the Railways Act. And in fact, if the member had been on the Select Committee, he would know that safety was one of the very, very important considerations that the Select Committee talked about. He probably still wouldn't have listened and taken any notice. And so what I'm raising is an issue of deep concern to this side of the House about the safety not only of the public, but also of the workers under these provisions and under the proposed provisions of this government. Thank you, Mr Chair.